There's a weight that some people carry from the very beginning. Not the kind you can see, not the kind others acknowledge. It's the weight of feeling everything, absorbing the room before you even enter it, sensing the shift in someone's energy before they speak, carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. And for years, you didn't know what it was. You just knew you were different. You just knew the world felt heavier for you than it seemed to for everyone else. They called it sensitivity. They told you to toughen up, to stop taking things so personally, to stop caring so much. And maybe you believed them. Maybe you spent years thinking something was wrong with you, that you were too soft, too fragile, too much. But here's what no one told you. That weight you've been carrying, it wasn't a flaw. It was preparation. You see, empaths don't start strong. They start overwhelmed. They start feeling the pain of others before they understand their own. They give and give, not because they're saints, but because somewhere deep inside, they learned that their value was tied to how much they could absorb, how much they could fix, how much they could endure without breaking. And the world? The world took advantage of that. It always does. But something happens later. Not at first. Not in those early years when you're still trying to make sense of why everything feels so loud. Why you can't just let things go the way others seem to. No, the shift comes later, when the weight becomes too much, when the exhaustion runs so deep you can't ignore it anymore. When you finally realize that what you thought was kindness was actually a slow form of self-abandonment. That's when it changes. That's when the empath personality doesn't just survive, it evolves. And not in the way people expect. Not louder, not more open, not more trusting. The opposite. They become quieter, more discerning, harder to read. They learn to protect what they once gave away freely. They learn that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. They learn that feeling everything doesn't mean you have to carry it all. And here's the truth they don't tell you when you're young and drowning in everyone else's emotions. That sensitivity you were told to suppress, it becomes your greatest strength. Not because you stop feeling, but because you finally learn what to do with it. You stop absorbing. You start observing. You stop reacting. You start choosing. And the people who once drained you, they can't anymore. Because you've learned the one thing that changes everything. You've learned how to feel without losing yourself in it. This isn't a story about becoming cold. It's a story about becoming whole. And it doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the quiet moments when you stop explaining yourself to people who never tried to understand you. It happens when you stop waiting for others to see your value and start guarding it like the rare thing it is. It happens when you realize that the years you spent feeling too much weren't wasted. They were training you for something most people will never access. The ability to see through people, to sense what's unspoken, to navigate the world with a level of awareness that can't be taught, only earned. So if you've spent your life feeling like you were born with a disadvantage, like your sensitivity made you weak, understand this. You weren't weak. You were just early. And what comes later? That's when everything you endured finally makes sense. The early years didn't come with a warning. There was no moment where someone sat you down and explained what was happening to you. No one told you that while other people could walk into a room and just exist, you were scanning, sensing, absorbing everything. The tension no one was talking about, the sadness someone was hiding behind a smile, the anger simmering just beneath the surface of polite conversation. You didn't choose to feel it. It just happened. And because it just happened, you thought it was normal. You thought everyone felt this way, but they didn't. And the confusion started there, in that gap between what you were experiencing and what everyone else seemed to be experiencing. They could let things go. You couldn't. They could hear a harsh word and move on. You would replay it for days, wondering what you did wrong, wondering if you could have said something different, wondering if the tension you felt was somehow your fault. And more often than not, you decided it was. Because that's what empaths do in the beginning. They take responsibility for things that were never theirs to carry. You became the person people came to when they needed something. Not because you offered, though you did, but because something about you signaled safety. You listened when no one else would. You stayed when others left. You absorbed their pain because somewhere deep inside, you believed that's what you were supposed to do. And for a while, it felt good. It felt like purpose. It felt like connection. But underneath that, something else was happening. You were emptying yourself to fill others. And no one was filling you back. The exhaustion came slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single breaking point. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small moments where you gave more than you had, where you put someone else's emotions above your own, where you stayed quiet about your own needs because their needs felt more urgent, more real, more worthy of attention. And you didn't even realize you were doing it. You just knew that at the end of every day, you felt drained, hollowed out, like something was being taken from you that you couldn't name. And the worst part? The people around you didn't see it. They saw someone who was always available, always understanding, always willing to help. They didn't see the weight you carried home with you. They didn't see the nights you stayed awake replaying conversations, analyzing every word, every tone, every shift in energy, trying to figure out what went wrong or what you could have done better. They didn't see the way you absorbed their anger and turned it inward, the way you took their criticism and made it your identity, the way you carried their sadness long after they had moved on from it. You became an emotional dumping ground, and you didn't even know that's what was happening. Because to you, it just felt like caring. It felt like being a good friend, a good partner, a good person. But caring without boundaries isn't care. It's self-erasure. And slowly, without noticing, you started disappearing. The manipulation didn't look like manipulation at first. It looked like need. It looked like someone reaching out, someone struggling, someone who just needed a little support. And you gave it, again and again. But here's what you didn't see then. Some people weren't reaching for help. They were reaching for supply. They learned that you would always answer, always soothe, always fix. They learned that they could unload their chaos onto you, and you would carry it. They learned that your empathy had no limit, no boundary, no off switch. And so they kept coming back, not because they valued you, but because you were useful. And when you finally tried to set a boundary, when you finally said you were tired, when you finally said you needed space, when you finally said no, they made you feel guilty for it. They called you selfish. They told you that you were changing, that you weren't the person they thought you were. And because you had spent so long tying your worth to how much you could give, you believed them. You backed down. You apologized. You opened the door again. And the cycle continued. You stayed in situations that hurt you because leaving felt like failure. You stayed with people who drained you because you believed you could help them, you could fix them, you could love them into healing. But you can't heal someone who isn't ready. And you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. All you can do is lose yourself trying. And that's exactly what happened. The blame always seemed to land on you. When things went wrong, when someone was upset, when tension filled the room, it was somehow your fault. You were too sensitive. You were overreacting. You were reading too much into things. And because you felt so much, because you questioned yourself constantly, you started believing it. Maybe you were the problem. Maybe you were too much. Maybe if you just tried harder, stayed quieter, gave more, needed less, maybe then things would be okay. But they never were. Because the problem was never you. The problem was that you were surrounded by people who didn't know how to hold space for someone who felt deeply. The problem was that you were taught to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. The problem was that no one ever told you that feeling everything doesn't mean you have to fix everything. And so you kept going. You kept giving. You kept absorbing. You kept carrying weight that wasn't yours. And inside, something was breaking. Not loudly, not visibly, but slowly, like a foundation cracking under pressure it was never meant to hold. You felt it in the exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. You felt it in the numbness that started creeping in where feeling used to be. You felt it in the way you started to disappear from your own life, like a background character in someone else's story. There were moments when you wondered if it would always be like this. Moments when you looked around and realized that the people you had poured into weren't pouring back. Moments when you felt the loneliness of being surrounded by people who needed you but didn't truly see you. And in those moments, you didn't have the words for it yet. You didn't understand that what you were experiencing had a name. You just knew it hurt. You just knew something was wrong. You just knew that the life you were living didn't feel like yours anymore. But you didn't leave. Not yet. Because empaths don't leave easily. They endure. They hope. They believe that if they just hold on a little longer, if they just love a little harder, if they just give a little more, things will change. And so you stayed. In the confusion. In the exhaustion. In the slow erosion of yourself. Not because you were weak, but because you hadn't yet learned that staying in pain isn't strength. It's just pain. And it doesn't make you noble. It just makes you tired. There was a pattern. You felt it, even if you couldn't name it. The same type of person kept showing up in your life. Different faces, different names, but the same energy, the same need, the same demand for your attention, your empathy, your endless capacity to absorb what they couldn't hold themselves. And every time, you thought it was coincidence. Every time, you thought maybe this one would be different. But they never were. You attracted the broken ones. The ones who seemed lost, who needed saving, who had a story that pulled at something deep inside you. And you didn't question it. You thought it was fate. You thought it was connection. You thought maybe you were meant to help them, meant to be the light in their darkness, meant to love them into wholeness. But what you didn't see then, what you couldn't see, was that they weren't looking for healing. They were looking for supply, and you were an endless source of it. Narcissists found you like heat-seeking missiles, not because you were weak, but because you were strong in all the ways they needed you to be. You had empathy they could exploit. You had boundaries they could push. You had a nervous system wired to attune, to adjust, to accommodate. And they sensed it. Not consciously, maybe, but on some primal level, they knew. They knew you would give more than you should. They knew you would stay longer than you should. They knew you would make excuses for behavior that others wouldn't tolerate. And the energy vampires? They circled you constantly. The ones who called only when they needed something. The ones who unloaded their problems but never asked about yours. The ones who took your time, your energy, your emotional labor, and gave nothing back. And you let them, not because you enjoyed it, but because saying no felt cruel. Turning away felt cold. And you had been taught that caring meant being available, that love meant sacrifice, that being a good person meant putting everyone else first. But here's the part no one tells you. Here's the part that changes everything once you finally see it. You weren't just attracting these people by accident. You were unconsciously seeking them out. Because as long as you were fixing someone else, you didn't have to face what was broken in you. As long as you were absorbed in their pain, you didn't have to sit with your own. As long as you were pouring into someone else's void, you didn't have to acknowledge the emptiness inside yourself. It wasn't kindness. It was avoidance. It was a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that convinced you your value was tied to how much you could give, how much you could endure, how much you could fix. And so you kept seeking out the wounded, the difficult, the emotionally unavailable, because their need validated your existence. Their brokenness gave you purpose. Their chaos kept you distracted from the quiet, aching truth you didn't want to face, that you didn't know who you were without someone to save. Your nervous system was wired differently from the start. While others processed the world through logic, through analysis, through detachment, you processed it through feeling. You didn't think your way through life. You felt your way through it. And that meant every interaction, every conversation, every glance carried weight. You weren't just hearing words. You were feeling the emotion behind them. You weren't just observing behavior. You were absorbing the energy beneath it. This wasn't a choice. It was biology. Your mirror neurons fired faster, stronger, more intensely than most. You didn't just empathize with people. You became them, temporarily. Their sadness became your sadness. Their anxiety became your anxiety. Their anger, even when it wasn't directed at you, lived in your body like it was your own. And because you felt it so intensely, you believed it was your responsibility to fix it. You believed that if you could just say the right thing, do the right thing, be enough, the feeling would go away. But it never did, because it was never yours to fix. You were living in a constant state of hypervigilance, scanning every room for emotional threats, reading every face for signs of displeasure, adjusting yourself, your tone, your energy to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to make sure everyone else was okay. And it was exhausting. But you didn't stop, because stopping felt like failing. And failing felt like confirmation that you weren't enough. The pattern repeated because you didn't understand what you were carrying. You didn't understand that the void you were trying to fill in others was the same void you were running from in yourself. You didn't understand that every time you lost yourself in someone else's problems, you were abandoning yourself. You didn't understand that the weight you felt wasn't just from absorbing others. It was from the years you had spent ignoring your own needs, your own pain, your own inner child screaming for attention you kept giving to everyone else. And so the cycle continued. You met someone new. You saw their potential. You saw the person they could become if they just had the right support, the right love, the right understanding. And you gave it. You gave everything. You poured yourself into them, believing that this time it would be different. This time they would see your worth. This time they would reciprocate. This time the love you gave would be the love you received. But it never was. Because people don't change because you love them. They change because they choose to. And most of the people you were attracting, they didn't want to change. They wanted someone to manage their emotions for them. They wanted someone to soothe their wounds without them having to do the work of healing. They wanted the comfort of your empathy without the responsibility of growth. And you gave it to them, over and over, until there was nothing left of you. The broken ones kept coming because you kept the door open, not because you were naive, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that your value came from being needed. You learned that love meant sacrifice. You learned that to be worthy, you had to earn it by being useful, by being selfless, by being endlessly available. And so you became all of those things. And in the process, you forgot that you were allowed to need too. You forgot that you were allowed to be unavailable. You forgot that your worth wasn't determined by how much you could carry. The pattern wasn't random. It was a reflection, a mirror showing you what you hadn't yet healed in yourself. Every narcissist, every energy vampire, every person who took more than they gave, they were showing you where you had abandoned yourself, where you had betrayed your own needs, where you had made yourself small to make someone else comfortable. And the pattern would keep repeating, keep showing up in different forms, until you finally stopped running from what it was trying to teach you. You weren't broken for attracting these people. You were unhealed. And there's a difference. Broken means unfixable. Unhealed means there's still work to do. And that work? It doesn't start with fixing someone else. It starts with finally turning inward and facing the void you've been running from your entire life. The breaking point doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a dramatic revelation or a sudden epiphany. It comes quietly, in a moment so ordinary you almost miss it. But this time, something is different. This time, when someone reaches for you, when they need something, when they expect you to drop everything, when they assume you'll be there like you always are, something inside you doesn't move. Something inside you goes still. And in that stillness, you finally see it. All of it. Maybe it's a betrayal. Maybe it's the person you poured years into, the one you believed in, the one you sacrificed for, turning around and blaming you for their unhappiness, their failures, their choices. Maybe it's the friend who only calls when they need something, who disappears when you finally ask for support. Maybe it's the partner who took your empathy and used it as a weapon, who learned exactly which words would hurt you most and said them anyway, knowing you'd forgive them because you always did. Or maybe it's not one moment at all. Maybe it's the exhaustion, the kind that sleep can't fix, the kind that sits in your bones, in your chest, in the part of you that used to feel everything and now feels nothing at all. You wake up one day and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. You realize you've been living a life that isn't yours, playing a role you never auditioned for, carrying weight that was never yours to hold. And you're tired, not just physically, existentially, tired of giving, tired of trying, tired of being the one who always understands, always forgives, always stays. And that's when it cracks open, not with anger, at first, with grief. Deep, hollow grief for all the years you spent disappearing, for all the times you silenced your own needs to accommodate someone else's, for all the moments you betrayed yourself to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to make sure everyone else was okay while you were drowning. You grieve the person you could have been if you hadn't spent so much of your life being what others needed you to be. The realization comes in waves, each one heavier than the last. You realize your kindness wasn't cherished, it was expected. You realize your empathy wasn't valued, it was exploited. You realize the people you showed up for wouldn't have done the same for you. And the worst part? You realize you taught them to treat you this way. You taught them that your boundaries were negotiable, that your needs were optional, that you would always be there no matter how little they gave back. You taught them that you didn't require reciprocity. And they believed you. And then comes the rage. Not loud, not explosive, quiet. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. The kind that doesn't scream, but burns. You're angry at them, at the ones who took and never thought to give back, at the ones who saw your empathy as weakness, at the ones who knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. But more than that, you're angry at yourself. For allowing it. For staying. For making excuses. For believing that if you just loved harder, gave more, tried better, they would finally see your worth. But they never did. Because people don't value what they didn't have to earn. And you gave yourself away for free. You sit with this for days, maybe weeks. You replay every conversation, every moment you should have left but didn't, every time you ignored the red flags because you wanted to believe in the potential you saw in them. And slowly, something shifts. The blame you've been carrying, the belief that it was your fault, that you were too much or not enough, that you somehow caused their behavior, it starts to lift. Not all at once, but gradually, like fog clearing. You see it now. You see that their inability to value you had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their capacity. You see that the problem wasn't that you cared too much, it was that you gave your care to people who couldn't hold it. You see that you weren't too sensitive. You were just surrounded by people who were too numb, too selfish, too empty to appreciate what you were offering. And the shift begins. Not externally. You don't announce it. You don't make grand declarations or have confrontational conversations. You don't try to explain yourself or make them understand. Because you finally realize something crucial. They don't need to understand. You don't need their validation, their apology, their acknowledgement of what they took from you. You don't need closure from people who were never open to begin with. The shift happens internally, in the quiet, in the decision you make with yourself, for yourself. The decision that you will never again abandon yourself for someone else's comfort. The decision that your empathy is no longer available to people who don't deserve it. The decision that from now on, you will guard your energy like the sacred thing it is, not because you've become cold, but because you've finally learned that love without boundaries is just self-destruction in disguise. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop trying to make people see your side, understand your feelings, acknowledge your pain. Because you realize that the people who needed those explanations were the same people who never truly listened in the first place. And you're done performing emotional labor for people who wouldn't do the same for you. This isn't healing yet. This is the wound opening so it can finally be cleaned. This is the breaking that has to happen before the rebuilding. This is the moment you stop looking outward for validation and start turning inward for truth. And the truth is this: you were never the problem. You were just in the wrong rooms, with the wrong people, giving the right love to those who had no idea what to do with it. And now you know better. And knowing changes everything. The rebuild doesn't look like what you expected. There's no announcement, no speech about new boundaries or self-respect, no confrontation where you finally tell people how they made you feel. You just start moving differently, quietly, deliberately. And the people who were used to the old you, they notice immediately. You stop responding right away. Messages that used to get instant replies now sit for hours, sometimes days. Not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer operating from a place of guilt. You're no longer afraid that delayed response means you're a bad person. You answer when you're ready, when you have the energy, when you actually want to. And if you don't want to, you don't. And you don't apologize for it. The phone calls you used to take at any hour, the ones where someone needed to vent, needed advice, needed you to drop everything and be their emotional support. You let them go to voicemail now. You listen later, if at all. And when you do call back, if you call back, there's a difference in your tone. You're present, but you're not porous. You listen, but you don't absorb. You care, but you don't carry. And when the conversation is done, you hang up and go back to your life. You don't spend the next 3 hours replaying it, analyzing it, worrying about whether you said the right thing. You used to be everywhere, available, reliable, the one people could count on no matter what. And now, you're selective. You show up for the people who've shown up for you. You invest in the relationships that are mutual, that are reciprocal, that don't leave you feeling drained and empty. And the ones that don't meet that standard, you let them fade. No dramatic exit. No explanation. You just stop feeding the connection. And most of them don't even reach out to ask why. Because they never valued your presence. They just got used to it. Boundaries used to feel cruel to you. Like you were being mean, being cold, being the kind of person you never wanted to become. But now you understand something you didn't before. Boundaries aren't walls. They're standards. They're the difference between who gets access to you and who doesn't. And not everyone deserves access. Not everyone has earned it. And you're done pretending that openness is the same as kindness. You stop explaining yourself. This might be the biggest shift of all. You used to over-explain everything. Why you couldn't make it, why you needed space, why you were upset, why you made the choices you made. You justified, you clarified, you defended. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that your feelings weren't valid unless you could make a strong enough case for them. But now, you just state it. I can't. I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. And when they push, when they ask why, when they try to guilt you into elaborating, you don't take the bait. It just doesn't. And you leave it there. Because you've realized that people who respect you don't need a dissertation to accept your no. The old you would have absorbed their disappointment. You would have felt it in your chest, in your stomach, in the tightness of your throat. You would have second-guessed yourself, wondered if you were being unreasonable, considered changing your mind just to make them feel better. But the new you let them sit with their disappointment. It's not your job to manage their emotions anymore. It's not your responsibility to sacrifice your peace so they can have comfort. Their feelings are theirs to hold. And you're no longer volunteering to hold them too. You become neutral, not cold, not detached, but no longer reactive. Someone tries to provoke you, to pull you into drama, to get a rise out of you, and you don't give it to them. You observe instead of engage. You watch instead of absorb. And your silence? It's not passive. It's strategic. Because you've learned that not everything deserves a response. Not every accusation needs a defense. Not every attack requires you to fight back. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. People start calling you different, distant, changed, not the person you used to be. And they say it like it's an accusation, like you've done something wrong. And maybe the old you would have tried to fix it, tried to prove you're still the same, tried to win them back. But the new you let them think whatever they want. Because you're not different in a bad way. You're different in a necessary way. You didn't become less. You became more boundaried, more intentional, more protective of the energy you used to give away like it was infinite. This is survival, not selfishness. This is self-preservation, not cruelty. This is what happens when an empath finally learns that their empathy is not a resource for everyone to extract. It's a gift, and gifts are only given to those who treat them as sacred. You're rebuilding, but you're not going back to who you were. You're becoming who you should have been all along. Someone who feels deeply but doesn't drown in it. Someone who cares but doesn't carry. Someone who loves but never again at the cost of losing themselves.